History is full of epic battles, noble kings, and groundbreaking discoveries. But we're not here for that. We're here for the weird, the wild, and the wait that actually happened. So buckle up, because here are 5 bizarre historical events you've never heard of, and probably won't believe. These are the stories that don't always make it into the leather-bound tomes, the ones whispered in footnotes or shared with a disbelieving chuckle. They remind us that the past was populated by actual people. People capable of profound wisdom, yes, but also spectacular foolishness, baffling decisions, and the occasional descent into pure, unadulterated absurdity. So, if you're ready to look beyond the usual historical narratives and delve into the truly bizarre, then you've come to the right place. Alright, let's dive right into the deep end of historical weirdness, shall we? Our first stop takes us to Rome, the year 897 AD. The political climate in the Papal States at this time was, to put it mildly, fraught. Think less holy contemplation and more Game of Thrones with fancier hats. Enter Pope Stephen VI. Stephen had some serious beef with his predecessor, Pope Formosus. This wasn't your garden variety disagreement over liturgical practices or theological interpretations. Oh no, this was a deep-seated, politically charged animosity. Formosus during his pontificate had made decisions and alliances that Stephen and the faction supporting him found utterly unacceptable. So, what's a new pope to do when he despises his dead predecessor with the fire of 1,000 suns? Well, if you're Pope Stephen VI, you don't just write a strongly worded encyclical or try to erase him from the record, you decide to put him on trial. The only minor hiccup? Pope Formosus had been dead for about 9 months. Stephen ordered Formosus's corpse to be exhumed from its tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. Imagine the scene workers, probably under duress, digging up the decomposing body of a former pope. The rotting corpse of Formosus was then, and I am not making this up, dressed in full papal vestments. They propped him up on a throne in the Basilica of St. John Lateran. A deacon was appointed to speak for the deceased. This macabre spectacle became known as the cadaver synod, or it was a full-blown ecclesiastical court with bishops and cardinals in attendance, all gathered to pass judgment on a dead man. The charges against Formosus were numerous, stemming from the intricate canon law and political rivalries of the time. Key among them was the accusation that he had violated canon law by accepting the papacy while he was already bishop of another see, Porto, and that he had committed perjury. Unsurprisingly, given that the defendant was deceased and unable to offer much in the way of a defense, Formosus was found guilty. The verdict was swift and brutal. All of his acts and ordinations as pope were annulled. The papal robes were stripped from Formosus's corpse. Then, the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he would have used for blessings and ordinations, were hacked off. After the mutilation, what was left of Formosus's body was initially buried in a common grave. Later his body was dug up again and, with weights attached, thrown into the Tiber River. Alright, let's fast forward about 1,000 years and hop over to the other side of the globe. Our next bizarre historical event takes us to Western Australia in 1932. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression, and Australian farmers, particularly those in the Campion district, were facing their own unique set of challenges. After World War I, many ex-soldiers had been settled in these marginal farming areas, encouraged to cultivate wheat. But they weren't the only ones interested in the land. Enter the emus. An estimated 20,000 of these emus, following their usual migratory patterns, descended upon the newly cultivated farmlands. To them, these vast fields of wheat weren't a testament to human agricultural endeavor. They were an all-you-can-eat buffet. The farmers, already struggling with economic hardship, were desperate. They appealed to the government for help. The Minister of Defense at the time was Sir George Pearce. He agreed to deploy the military. Yes, you heard that right. The Australian military was officially tasked with waging war against a population of birds. So, in October 1932, Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery was dispatched to the Campion district. He was accompanied by a small contingent of soldiers armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and a hefty supply of 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The plan seemed straightforward enough: find the emus, shoot the emus, problem solved. However, the emus, it turned out, were surprisingly formidable opponents. They didn't conveniently bunch up in easily targetable groups as expected. Instead, they proved to be masters of guerrilla warfare. Major Meredith himself noted with a degree of grudging respect that the emus seemed to have an almost uncanny ability to organize. The first engagement on November 2nd was less than a resounding success. The soldiers spotted a flock of about 50 emus. They opened fire, but the birds scattered quickly, their speed and erratic movements making them difficult targets. Subsequent attempts proved equally frustrating. The emus would split into smaller groups, running in all directions, making effective use of the machine guns nearly impossible. After several weeks of largely fruitless campaigning, and with mounting negative press, the military operation was called off in early December. Chapter 3. The Unstoppable Urge to Boogie, the Dancing Plague of 1518. Let's waltz our way over to Strasbourg, in the Alsace region, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, in the summer of 1518. This isn't a story of battles or political intrigue in the traditional sense, but it's a historical event so strange, so unsettling, that it continues to baffle historians and medical experts to this day. It all began, innocuously enough, with one woman. Her name was Frau Trophea. In July of that year, Frau Trophea stepped out of her house and into the narrow streets of Strasbourg and began to dance. Now, this wasn't a joyful jig or a celebratory shuffle. Accounts describe it as a compulsive, frenzied, and seemingly involuntary dance. She danced for hours without rest, without any apparent music. Her husband and neighbors looked on, first with curiosity, then with concern, and eventually with alarm. She simply could not stop. Within a week, something truly extraordinary started to happen. Dozens of other people began to join Frau Trophea, caught up in the same inexplicable dancing mania. They too danced with a desperate, unceasing energy. The phenomenon spread like wildfire. Soon the streets of Strasbourg were filled with scores, then hundreds of people dancing uncontrollably. They danced day and night, their bodies contorting, their faces etched with a mixture of agony and ecstasy. The authorities were, understandably, perplexed and deeply worried. This wasn't a festival, it was a crisis. The dancers weren't eating, they weren't sleeping, they were literally dancing themselves to exhaustion, and in some cases, to death. Reports from the time suggest that some individuals suffered heart attacks, strokes, or simply collapsed from sheer physical depletion. The city council and local physicians were at a loss to explain what was happening or how to stop it. In a move that, with hindsight, seems rather counterintuitive, the city authorities decided that the best way to cure the dancing plague was more dancing. Their reasoning, based on the medical theories of the time, was that the dancers were suffering from hot blood. Therefore, the cure was to let them dance it out, to literally sweat out the affliction. So they cleared open spaces, guild halls were set aside, and they even hired musicians to provide a beat for the afflicted. Chapter 4. The Emperor's Unexpected Furry Ambush, Napoleon and the Bunnies. Our next historical oddity involves one of the most famous military commanders in history, Napoleon Bonaparte. Emperor of the French, conqueror of much of Europe, a strategic genius whose campaigns are still studied in military academies worldwide. This is a man who faced down coalitions of empires, who reshaped the map of a continent. So naturally you'd expect any tale of his defeat to involve cannons, cavalry charges, and perhaps a cunning Duke of Wellington. But this story involves a rather different kind of adversary. We're talking about rabbits. Yes, fluffy, twitchy-nosed, adorable bunnies. The setting for this unusual encounter was sometime after the treaties of Tilsit in 1807, a moment when Napoleon was at the zenith of his power. To celebrate his diplomatic and military successes, Napoleon decided he wanted to organize a grand rabbit hunt, a bit of leisurely sport for the emperor and his esteemed guests. His chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, was tasked with arranging the festivities. Berthier, wanting to ensure a successful and impressive hunt for his emperor, took his duties very seriously. He reportedly procured a vast number of rabbits. Some accounts say several hundred, others claim as many as 3,000, and had them gathered in a large field where the hunt was to take place. The stage was set for Napoleon to demonstrate his marksmanship and enjoy a day of imperial relaxation. The beaters released the rabbits, and Napoleon and his hunting party readied their firearms, anticipating the thrill of the chase as the bunnies scattered in fear. Except the rabbits didn't scatter, or rather, they didn't scatter away from the hunters. Instead, in a move that must have bewildered everyone present, the rabbits turned and charged towards Napoleon and his entourage. A veritable horde of bunnies, a fluffy, bounding wave, was heading straight for the most powerful man in Europe. Now, why would these rabbits, normally timid creatures, behave in such an uncharacteristically aggressive manner? The answer, it turns out, lies in Berthier's procurement strategy. Instead of trapping wild rabbits, which would have naturally fled from humans, Berthier had, in his zeal to provide ample targets, purchased domesticated rabbits from local farmers. These were tame bunnies, accustomed to being fed by humans. So, when these hundreds, possibly thousands of farm-raised rabbits saw a group of men approaching, they didn't perceive them as a threat. They perceived them as dinner ladies. Chapter 5. The Sweet, Sticky, and Surprisingly Deadly Deluge. The Great Molasses Flood. Our final bizarre historical event takes us to Boston, Massachusetts on January 15, 1919. It was an unseasonably warm winter day with temperatures climbing above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius, a significant thaw for a New England January. In Boston's North End, a bustling commercial district, stood a massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter, owned by the Purity Distilling Company. This tank wasn't holding water or oil or anything you might typically associate with industrial storage on this scale. It was holding molasses. Over 2.3 million gallons of thick, dark, sticky molasses destined primarily for the production of industrial alcohol, a key ingredient in munitions manufacturing. World War I had just ended, but demand was still there. Molasses was big business. Around 12:30 p.m., as workers and residents were heading for their lunch breaks, the giant molasses tank ruptured catastrophically. Witnesses reported hearing a sound like machine gun fire as the rivets popped, followed by a deafening roar and a ground-shaking tremor. The tank essentially exploded, unleashing its entire contents in an instant. What followed was not a gentle ooze, but a colossal wave of molasses, estimated to be between 15 to 25 feet high at its peak. This wasn't just any wave, it was a tsunami of syrup, moving with terrifying speed, estimated at around 35 miles per hour. Imagine the sheer weight and force of over 2.3 million gallons of dense liquid suddenly let loose. The molasses surged through the streets of the North End, a sticky, brown tide of destruction. Buildings were smashed from their foundations, freight cars were derailed, and the elevated train tracks nearby were damaged. People and animals in the path of the wave were caught completely unawares. The force was enough to sweep adults off their feet, crush wagons, and engulf everything in its path. The scene was one of utter chaos and horror. The air filled with the sickeningly sweet smell of molasses, mixed with the sounds of collapsing structures and the cries of the injured. It was a disaster unlike anything Boston, or perhaps any city, had ever experienced. The aftermath was devastating. 21 people lost their lives in the Great Molasses Flood, and around 150 more were injured. Victims were crushed, drowned, or asphyxiated by the viscous goo. Horses integral to the city's transport at the time were also killed, trapped in the sticky morass. Chapter 6. History's Unbelievable Encore. So next time you think history is just dates and battles, remember, it's also full of zombie popes, military-grade emus, cursed dance parties, rabbit rebellions, and molasses tsunamis. Like, comment, and subscribe for more weird history that's just too good to be true, but is. And, hey, if you've heard of something even stranger, drop it in the comments, we dare you. Thanks for joining me, LD, on this journey through the bizarre.